Everyone in the small, tight-knit community knew Henry as the charming grandfather who always had a twinkle in his eye and a story to tell. But behind the jokes and endearing smiles was a darker, more sinister reality, one that no one could have imagined. The man they all adored wasn't just flirtatious. He was hiding a secret so shocking it would turn their admiration into fear. Henry Thompson was the kind of man who could light up a room. At 72 years old, he was the life of every neighborhood gathering, quick with a witty remark and never short on compliments. His charm was legendary, earning him the affectionate nickname Flirty Grandpa. Henry wasn't just popular with the ladies in the senior group. He had a knack for making everyone feel special. His silver hair and neatly pressed clothes gave him the appearance of a man who cared about the details, a trait that only added to his irresistible persona. To outsiders, Henry seemed harmless, a sweet older man enjoying his golden years with a twinkle in his eye and a spring in his step. But not everyone in the neighborhood shared this fond opinion of him. There were whispers, barely audible over the laughter Henry inspired, that something wasn't quite right. The younger women who lived nearby spoke in hushed tones about his overly familiar nature. "It's just how he is," people would say, brushing off their discomfort as an overreaction. Even his family waved off concerns, chalking up his flirtatious behavior to harmless fun. After all, Henry was a widower who'd spent decades devoted to his late wife. Surely he deserved a little fun, right? What no one realized was how deliberate Henry's actions truly were. He would frequently visit local shops, not to buy anything, but to linger and engage in conversations that always seemed to go one step too far. He knew everyone's schedules, who would be home during the day, and who lived alone. To Henry, it wasn't about innocent banter. It was about control, a thrill he craved in his otherwise mundane life. Some found his attention flattering, others unsettling, but no one thought to dig deeper. Until one day, an encounter at the community center made someone uneasy enough to act. A young volunteer, startled by Henry's persistent and invasive questions about her personal life, decided to share her concerns with a friend. That friend, in turn, started piecing together similar stories from other women in town. A pattern began to emerge, but it wasn't until one of Henry's seemingly innocent visits turned into an outright accusation that the community started questioning the true nature of their beloved flirty grandpa. The accusation that rocked the community came from a woman named Jessica, a 34-year-old single mother who had recently moved to town. She first met Henry at the local farmer's market, where he charmed her with his warm smile and playful jokes. At first, she thought nothing of his friendliness, chalking it up to the kindness of a small town. But over time, Henry's behavior began to shift. He started showing up at the market every Saturday without fail, always ensuring he bumped into her. He would linger at her booth, asking increasingly personal questions about her family, her work, and even her past relationships. Jessica began to feel uneasy, but like so many others, she dismissed her discomfort. "He's just being friendly," she told herself. One Saturday, Henry crossed a line that Jessica couldn't ignore. After complimenting her dress, he leaned in too close and made a suggestive comment that left her stunned. She quickly packed up her stall and left, but Henry's behavior didn't stop there. Over the next week, she noticed him walking by her house more often than usual. He waved every time, pretending it was a coincidence, but the frequency of his appearances felt intentional. Jessica decided to confide in a neighbor, Sarah, who had lived in the town for years. To Jessica's surprise, Sarah wasn't shocked. "That's just Henry," Sarah said dismissively at first. But as Jessica described her experiences, Sarah began to recall her own uncomfortable encounters with Henry. Determined to get to the bottom of things, Jessica started talking to other women in the community. What she uncovered was a troubling pattern. Women of all ages shared similar stories. Henry's seemingly innocent compliments turning into inappropriate comments, his habit of appearing where he wasn't expected, and the way he always seemed to know more about their lives than they had told him. Feeling emboldened, Jessica decided to confront Henry in a public setting. At the next town hall meeting, she stood up and recounted her experiences, naming Henry directly. The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Some residents gasped in disbelief, while others exchanged knowing glances. Henry, seated near the back, chuckled nervously and tried to deflect the accusations with his usual charm. But this time, his laughter didn't land. The cracks in his perfect image had begun to show, and the town wasn't about to let them go unnoticed. Henry's once unshakable charm began to crumble after Jessica's public accusation. For the first time, the community looked at him with suspicion rather than admiration. Whispers that had once been brushed aside now took on a more sinister tone. Women who had stayed silent began speaking up, sharing unsettling stories that mirrored Jessica's experience. Among these accounts were eerie patterns: Henry's habit of appearing in places he shouldn't have been, his knowledge of private details about people's lives, and his persistence in crossing boundaries. What had once seemed like harmless eccentricities now painted a much darker picture of a man who had manipulated the trust of an entire town. One of the most disturbing revelations came from a young waitress named Kelly, who worked at the local diner. She described how Henry had been a regular customer, always sitting in her section and leaving generous tips. At first, she thought he was just a kind old man, but then she noticed how his compliments became increasingly personal, eventually veering into inappropriate territory. He once left her a note with his phone number and a comment about how he could show her a good time, a gesture that left her feeling deeply uncomfortable. Like Jessica, Kelly initially dismissed her unease, not wanting to make waves. But hearing others share similar stories made her realize she wasn't alone. Meanwhile, Henry's family was caught off guard by the growing allegations. His son, Michael, struggled to reconcile the image of the doting father and grandfather he knew with the man the town was beginning to see. When confronted, Henry laughed off the accusations, claiming they were misunderstandings or exaggerations. "I'm just a friendly guy," he insisted. But as more women came forward, the weight of the evidence became impossible to ignore. A deeper investigation revealed another layer to Henry's behavior. He had been keeping meticulous notes about the women he interacted with, details about their routines, families, and even addresses, hidden in a drawer in his home. When this discovery came to light, it sent shockwaves through the community. What had started as accusations of inappropriate behavior now hinted at something far more calculated and predatory. The town began to question everything they thought they knew about Henry, and the once beloved Flirty grandpa found himself isolated as the walls of his carefully constructed facade began to collapse. As the allegations against Henry continued to pile up, the community's unease deepened. What had begun as discomfort with his overly flirtatious nature had now escalated into something far more serious. The discovery of Henry's notebook, containing personal details about various women in the town, was the turning point. Each entry was precise, noting schedules, preferences, and even vulnerabilities that Henry had gleaned from casual conversations. The chilling meticulousness of his notes painted a picture of a man who had been planning his interactions with disturbing intent. The notebook wasn't just evidence of his behavior, it was a roadmap of manipulation. Jessica, Kelly, and other women who had come forward were both vindicated and horrified. The realization that Henry's actions weren't just spur-of-the-moment choices, but part of a calculated effort, sent shockwaves through the community. The once friendly, charming man was now viewed with suspicion and fear. Parents began warning their daughters to steer clear of him, and Henry's previously welcome presence at community events became an uncomfortable spectacle. People avoided eye contact, whispered behind his back, and distanced themselves. The man who had been at the center of every social gathering was now an outcast. Henry, however, refused to acknowledge the severity of the situation. He maintained his innocence, insisting that the notebook was nothing more than a hobby, a way to remember things about people. "It's harmless," he said during one heated confrontation. But the women who had been affected by his actions knew better. The level of detail in the notebook, combined with his pattern of behavior, told a different story. It wasn't just about remembering names or birthdays. It was about control. As the investigation deepened, law enforcement became involved. Officers visited Henry's home and began searching for additional evidence. What they found further complicated the case. Hidden in a locked chest were photos of women in the community, many of which had been taken without their knowledge. Some showed them at the park, others through the windows of their homes. The discovery confirmed everyone's worst fears. Henry had been stalking women for years. The revelation left the community reeling. How could they have missed the signs? How had someone so seemingly harmless deceived them for so long? The answers weren't easy to face, and as Henry's secrets unraveled, the town found itself grappling with a painful truth. The danger had been hiding in plain sight all along. The community's shock turned to outrage as the full extent of Henry's actions came to light. The photos, the notebook, and the testimonies from multiple women painted a clear picture of a man who had carefully cultivated a facade of charm to disguise his predatory behavior. The revelations led to immediate legal action. Henry was arrested on charges of harassment, stalking, and invasion of privacy, though many felt these charges didn't fully capture the gravity of his betrayal. For decades, he had manipulated the trust of the town, using his status as a harmless older man to avoid suspicion. At his arraignment, Henry maintained his innocence, claiming that the notebook and photos were merely misunderstandings. He stood before the court with the same disarming smile he had used to win over the town, but this time, it had no effect. The women who had spoken out against him were present, their bravery finally forcing him to confront the consequences of his actions. Jessica, the first to publicly accuse him, felt a mixture of relief and anger as she watched Henry attempt to downplay his behavior. His dismissiveness only fueled her determination to ensure justice was served. The trial that followed became the talk of the town. Every detail of Henry's double life was scrutinized, from the way he had ingratiated himself with neighbors, to the calculated methods he had used to gather personal information. Witness after witness took the stand, recounting encounters that ranged from unsettling to outright terrifying. The evidence was damning, and the prosecution painted Henry as a manipulative predator who had exploited his image to prey on vulnerable women. His defense team argued that he was simply an eccentric old man whose actions had been misconstrued, but the sheer volume of evidence made this argument difficult to believe. In the end, the jury found Henry guilty on multiple counts, and he was sentenced to several years in prison. As he was led away in handcuffs, the town breathed a collective sigh of relief, though the scars of his betrayal would linger for years. The case served as a harsh reminder that appearances can be deceiving, and that even the most trusted members of a community can harbor dark secrets. For Jessica, Kelly, and the others, the verdict was more than just justice. It was a reclaiming of their power and a warning to never again ignore their instincts, no matter how harmless someone might seem. Henry's conviction marked the end of his reign as the town's charming grandfather, but the aftermath of his actions left a profound impact on the community. The trial had forced the town to confront uncomfortable truths, not just about Henry, but about their own complacency. For years, they had excused his behavior as harmless flirtation, dismissing concerns and silencing their instincts. Now, they were grappling with the guilt of having enabled him, even if unknowingly. The local paper ran a headline that summed up the sentiment: "The danger we ignored. Lessons from the Henry Thompson case." Jessica, who had been the first to speak out, found herself thrust into an unexpected role as an advocate for victims. Though she had initially been hesitant to share her story, her courage had inspired others to come forward, creating a ripple effect that exposed the extent of Henry's predatory behavior. She began working with local organizations to raise awareness about harassment and the importance of trusting one's instincts. Jessica's efforts led to the formation of a support group for women in the community, providing a safe space for others to share their experiences and seek support. Meanwhile, Henry's family faced their own reckoning. His son, Michael, struggled to reconcile the man he had idolized with the predator revealed in court. Michael issued a public apology on behalf of the family, expressing deep sorrow for the pain his father had caused. He and his siblings took steps to distance themselves from Henry's legacy, selling his house and donating the proceeds to local charities that supported victims of abuse. While some in the community sympathized with the family's plight, others couldn't help but wonder how much they had known about Henry's behavior and whether they, too, had chosen to ignore the warning signs. The case also led to broader changes in the town. local officials introduced new programs aimed at educating residents about recognizing and reporting harassment. Workshops were held at schools, community centers, and workplaces, emphasizing the importance of speaking up and taking concerns seriously. These efforts created a renewed sense of vigilance, ensuring that no one would feel dismissed or invalidated again. Though the scars of Henry's betrayal would take time to heal, the community emerged stronger and more united. What began as a shocking scandal ultimately became a catalyst for change, proving that even in the face of darkness, it is possible to find light and rebuild trust. In the months following Henry's conviction, the town began to settle back into a semblance of normalcy, though the shadow of his actions lingered. The community, once so tightly knit, now carried an undercurrent of mistrust that hadn't existed before. People became more cautious, questioning behaviors they might have once overlooked. While this newfound vigilance was a step toward safety, it also served as a reminder of the damage Henry had inflicted, not just on his victims, but on the collective innocence of the town. Jessica, now a symbol of resilience and advocacy, found a new purpose in her life. She partnered with state organizations to launch awareness campaigns about harassment and stalking, sharing her story to help others understand the importance of speaking out. Her work extended beyond the town, reaching neighboring communities and inspiring other victims to come forward. For Jessica, this wasn't just about justice for herself. It was about creating a world where no one else would feel silenced or ignored. Her courage had ignited a movement, proving that even in the face of fear, change was possible. Henry, on the other hand, faced the harsh reality of prison life. Stripped of the charm and power he had wielded so effectively in the outside world, he was just another inmate. The man who had once thrived on manipulation now found himself isolated and despised, even among fellow prisoners. As months turned into years, his health began to decline, and the vibrant, flirty persona he had carefully crafted faded into obscurity. In his final days, Henry was a shadow of the man the town had once celebrated, his legacy tarnished beyond repair. For the town, Henry's downfall became a cautionary tale, a reminder that evil can wear a friendly face and that vigilance is everyone's responsibility. The community took steps to rebuild trust, organizing regular town meetings and creating support systems for those in need. Over time, a sense of unity began to return, though it would never quite be the same. People now looked out for one another with a deeper sense of care, their shared ordeal having forged stronger bonds. In the end, the town learned an invaluable lesson. No matter how charming or familiar someone may seem, actions speak louder than appearances. Henry's story became a stark warning that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones hiding in plain sight, reminding everyone to trust their instincts and never ignore the small signs that something isn't right.